Hi guys, it's Leanna of Mission Misfit Designs, and today we're going to be making some stuffing. So usually I take a lot of scrap fabric, I cut it up into little tiny pieces, and then I take that and I mix it up with polyfill to make stuffing for my plushies. And I just recently got a bunch of fabric scraps from somebody that was giving away a lot of fabric, and I sorted out all of the fabric pieces that were large and usable. If it was like I kind of was guesstimating, but as long as it was like a decent size, I was pulling it out. But if it was like a lot of smaller pieces or a lot of like quilt blocks that were in there, I pulled out a lot of different stuff. I kept some stuff for myself, some of the stuff went to my school. But yeah, so anything that was a scrap or just like wasn't really necessarily usable, I put in a bunch of trash bags. I think I got like 2.5 trash bags out of all that of scraps that I am slowly going to be working on cutting up into little tiny pieces and then using for stuffing. Usually I do take that stuffing and I mix it with polyfill. So I use like half the fabric, half polyfill, and I mix it together. Sometimes I use more fabric. It depends on how dense I want the plushie and how, like, for my dinosaurs, I still use straight polyfill, but for other stuff, I'll use a lot more fabric just because it's a little easier to make it denser with the fabric than the stuffing. But it just kind of depends on the item. Like my mushrooms, I will stuff with just straight scraps. A lot of the smaller guys, like the little frogs and the leggy frogs and stuff, I'll stuff with straight fabric scraps, but my large plushies, I'll mix it up. But yeah, the only things I really used for this, obviously, other than my fabric scraps, was a rotary cutter and my cutting mat. My cutting mat is not very big. It's 10 by 16, so it is a small one, and it's a little annoying. But yeah, I used both of those, and I took a lot of the fabric. I took a little bit of fabric, cut it all up into little tiny pieces, and I still have so much more to do. That barely made a dent in that trash bag. But that's all I'm doing for today. So let's go into the footage. Alright guys, into the land of voiceover we go. So as you can see, I just pulled out like a handful of my scrap fabrics, and I am taking my rotary cutter and my cutting board, and I'm laying out like 2 or 3 pieces of scrap at a time, or here like I have this thicker, like larger orange piece, but I'm kind of pulling out like individual scrap pieces, cutting them up into like squares, and then tossing it into my bin that I have in front of me. I am sitting on my bedroom floor because it's just a lot easier to do it that way. And as you can see, this fabric didn't want to cut, but I've seen some people do it to where they'll take like a handful of scraps like I had in the very beginning, throw it on their cutting mat, and then take the rotary cutter and slowly like chip through it. For me, that just doesn't work. Maybe my rotary cutter isn't sharp enough. Well, I know my rotary cutter's not sharp enough, but also it just, I don't know. To me, it takes so much longer to do it that way. And I'd prefer to do it the way you see me doing here, where I'm just pulling out like a handful of pieces and then pulling out individual pieces from there, cutting it up like this in smaller sections. I feel like I get through it a lot faster, and it's also a lot less frustrating. I barely made a dent. I had a whole trash bag full of scrap fabrics. I barely made a dent in those doing this. But you'll see at the end here that my container's almost full. So I definitely did get a good amount of scrap stuffing made that I'll mix with my polyfill, or I'll use on its own depending on the project. But yeah, I'm literally just taking the rotary cutter and just cutting it all up into little squares and tossing it in the bin. Sometimes I'll pull out my scissors if my rotary cutter didn't really get through something, or if something's like kind of smaller and thinner, I'll use my scissors. But it's so much easier to use a rotary cutter for this, and I'm not a big rotary cutter fan, to be completely real with you. I prefer to use scissors when I'm cutting out my patterns. With my rotary cutter, I tend to like lose control of where I'm cutting, and I have a bad habit of like cutting into the pattern or cutting like way off of where I'm going. I also don't have the biggest cutting mat, so that also kind of hinders using a rotary cutter when I have to use the cutting mat every couple inches. Yeah, but this is like the only thing I use my rotary cutters for. But yeah, I'm just cutting up a bunch of scrap fabric, and you can tell like I'll fold some of them up into 2 layers, or I'll kind of stack some stuff on top of each other, and then every so often I'll mix up my little bin. Alright guys, so I just got done cutting up all of the fabric scraps. As you can see, this is what the bucket's looking like. And I did like take it and I mix it up with my hands, and then I take it and I hold the lid on and I shake it up like crazy just to help kind of mix everything up. I guess technically you don't have to do this. I kind of just think it's fun. But yeah, this is all fabric. Yeah, all of these scraps will again either be mixed with polyfill or put straight into plushies. There definitely are some pieces in here where my rotary cutter was being a pain, and like that are kind of like this. And when I'm using it, I'll cut them up a little smaller with my scissors. But for the most part, I just try to get everything into mostly smaller little chunks. And yeah, this is such a good way that I have found as someone who sews and does a lot of projects to take and use up my scraps. I really don't like throwing away fabric scraps. I know, of course, one little person's little amount of fabric scraps that I use in my lifetime definitely will not make a huge impact being avoided from landfills, but it still is taking all of that out of landfills and running a business like this. I just don't feel right making a lot of garments and stuff without, repurposing what I can. So even the little pieces of fabric that aren't big enough to be sewn with are still being used, even if it is just as stuffing. These were from something that was given to me, but I still do this with every single fabric scrap I have. I do it with every single yarn scrap I have. I do not throw away textiles just because I don't feel right throwing away textiles, so I make sure to use them in every way possible, because, we only have one planet, we gotta protect it. I hope you guys liked watching me make all of that stuffing, and I definitely will be using that in projects in the future. So yeah, if you guys liked watching this video, please make sure to like the video, comment down below, share it with a friend, and definitely hit that subscribe button if you want to see more sewing or crochet or just life content from me. And thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!